If you want to guarantee yourself a championship run, this is the exact video you need, because I'll be going over all my top starts and sits of the week that can actually win you a week by themselves, as well as going through all the matchups. I got you covered, so make sure to stick around to the end of the video, because I'll be giving you guys a list of top kickers and defenses we can pick up off the waiver wire to actually give us so many points and make this week's win so much easier. But let's get right into it. Make sure to drop a like while you're watching this video. It would help me out a ton. It'll make you feel a little bit better as well. But the first start here is going to be Zack Moss, and I know this name by itself is going to make you cringe a little bit and start tweaking. But let's look into this. His fantasy points haven't been the best. They haven't been too crazy over the past 2 weeks while he's filling in for JT. He had 7 and 9. Definitely not the best. But I'm putting my trust in him this week because the usage is there, as well as a couple other reasons. But he's been on the field for 90% of the snaps in this 2-week sample size. He's averaging 15 carries and 5 targets out of the backfield in this stretch, and he has quite literally zero competition in the backfield for anybody else to take snaps or usage from him. He is that guy. He's just been unlucky. Last week's matchup was a complete blowout. They completely abandoned the run, and they're coming into this week's matchup against the Steelers, who aren't a super tough defense. They do allow the 12th most points to opposing running backs, so a little bit better than average, and they just allowed Zeke to finish as the RB1 on them last week. If he can do that, then Zack Moss can put together a couple fantasy points for us here. The sportsbooks have him projected for just over 70 rush yards and 3 receptions on the week. He's in a safer spot. This is the best matchup and most positive matchup he's had since filling in for JT. Gardner Minshew can be a start. I do think there's a lot better options out there. Again, if you want a second opinion, just make sure to comment any questions you have while watching this video. I go through and answer 100% of them before Sunday's tip-off. But Pittman is a must start, and I'd lean towards sitting down, so I'm not too excited about him. And as for the Steelers, I'm really not starting anybody in this offense. Mitch Trubisky is a downgrade, and it's a complete boom-bust risk. I don't really trust it. A lot of the times we can't really afford to sit these guys, but I'm not in love with anybody. Maybe Pat Freiermuth can be started because the tight end pool is just so shallow. But Gus Edwards needs to be sat. I should not have to say this enough, but for some reason he's still being started in about 40% of leagues. Get him out of your starting lineup. Get him as far away from those guys as you can. We're going back to the well here. He was in last week's video, and he put up 1 fantasy point, 6 carries. He was just absolutely terrible. He didn't even see the field, and that's not going to change. The Ravens have been winning games. They've put up 70 points over the past 2 weeks, and he has not been involved in any of them. He had 28 and 27% of the snaps in those 2 weeks. This is a full-blown 3 running back by committee as far as usage goes. The snaps might be a little bit drastic, but the usage is still completely split. All of these running backs have their own specific role, and that makes the floor and ceiling for these guys a whole bunch lower. Gus Edwards and Justice Hill are really getting the butt end of this. Keaton Mitchell, maybe he's fine. Not really in love with starting it though. This Jaguars defense has been negative against the run. They've only allowed 5 rushing touchdowns in the entirety of all season. Again, this one seems pretty obvious, but people are down bad. They're dealing with a whole bunch of injuries. As for everybody else, we're going to be starting Lamar still. We're going to be starting Isaiah Likely as well. He's a top tight end that I do like this week. We can start Zay Flowers and Odell. Outside of those guys, I'm not really loving anybody else. As for the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence can still be started, even though the Ravens are a really tough defense against quarterbacks. And Calvin Ridley / Zay Jones are going to be more risky starts. You can put in your lineup if you need them. Again, make sure to comment any questions you have. I'll be answering them all. And if you guys want to make sure you have the right guys on your bench, I just posted a video yesterday about the top players we need to be stashing for the fantasy playoffs that can quite literally win you weeks. I'll pin it up here at the top. It takes like 2 seconds to watch because I put timestamps through all of it. I don't want to waste your time. But some more running backs we are starting most definitely, and I'll talk about this one pretty quickly, is the Dolphins running backs. A lot of people are distancing themselves from these guys because of the matchup that they get. Yes, it's a really tough one. They get the Jets defense, who allow the least points to quarterbacks, wide receivers, but their run defense is not as bad. A lot of people see the name value of this Jets defense and maybe even projections from other sites and put them out of their starting lineup. Their run defense actually is positive against running backs. They allow the 6th most points to opposing running backs. Is a lot of that because their defense is so tough and teams just have to run? Yes, but it's also just not that tough of a defense to face. Now, with that being said, you are still in more of a negative light because of how good their overall defense is in the pass game. But these running backs have been great. It really hasn't mattered what matchup they get. They're still going to put up points, and both of them are questionable coming into this matchup, so we could get a scenario where one of them is starting and the other one isn't. If that happens, they are a true week winner. Put both of them in your starting lineups regardless of who's in and who's out. I'm going to be leaning towards sitting Tua because of how tough this defense is against quarterbacks and wide receivers. We have to start Tyreek Hill. It's just a given. You're not going to be sitting him. Waddle is a little bit more risky this week. He's a bit boomer bust for me. And I'm not starting anybody else on the Jets outside of Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. We really have to treat him as a wide receiver at this point because he gets so many targets. But we're going through and sitting James Conner. I know a lot of people can't afford to sit him on their roster, and I want you to look more into the numbers. He hasn't scored double-digit fantasy points since week 3. I'm not going to credit him for most of that because he was missing a lot of time with injury, but that was still 6 healthy games ago. We can't just be chasing the game he just had. He came off a game where he had 25 carries for over 100 yards, but don't expect that to continue here because he gets a matchup against the 49ers, who allow the 5th least points points to opposing running back. They're extremely tough and they have been on fire recently. I don't trust anybody on this offense to be viable. The 49ers run defense has been absolutely amazing since the addition of Chase Young. They haven't allowed a team to put over 20 points on them in 6 weeks. And that's including matchups against the Seahawks, the Eagles, the Jaguars, who are all top offenses. He's nothing more than a flex play. Don't project him for more than that. The 49ers are going to win this game by 13. That's what the sports books have them at. This game just screams sit all your Cardinals players at all costs. And as for the 49ers, we're going to be starting all these guys, again, riding the hot hand, Purdy, Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, all of them. But speaking of riding the hot hand, we're going to be starting Rashee Rice as well. Do I think he's an amazing play, must start 20 plus point projection guy? No, part of that has to do with the matchup. You might look at me and say, well, this is a good matchup. Let me get into it. It's good and bad at the same time. They play the Patriots this week, who allow the 10th most points to opposing wide receivers. Yes, this is positive, but at the same time, they're projected to get blown out by the Chiefs. And if we know anything about blowout games, it means more run-heavy script, which could be bad for Rashee Rice, but he's still a start either way. He's continued to improve and up his snap count every single week. It is clear that he is the #1 guy for the Chiefs. If we look at his snap percentage over the past few weeks since the bye week, it started 57, then 67, then 69, then 85. Last week, a season high by a long shot. And the more his snaps have been going up, the more targets he's been seeing. He's averaging 10 targets over his last 3 games. That is amazing. And again, he's a pretty safe play this week, even if he doesn't have the highest ceiling. He's projected for 6 receptions for 60 yards. That's, again, very good. We're starting Kelsey, we're starting Mahomes, we're starting Rice, we're starting Pacheco if he does play. If he doesn't, I'm not in love with starting these running backs. As for the Patriots, I'm really not getting anyone into my starting lineup outside of Ezekiel Elliott. But an infamous sit. We just cannot deal with the headache this week. Does he have potential? Yes, but his bust potential is absolutely crazy. Don't put him in your starting lineup. Gabe Davis is a guy that we cannot be trusting to move us into another round of the playoffs. If you've had him on your roster for this long, you already know where I'm going with this. The risk to reward ratio is just out of this world. Do not trust it. And now he gets a matchup against the Cowboys, who allow the 6th least points to opposing wide receivers. It is a terrible spot to be in. He just came off a game where he put up an absolute donut. He only had 2 targets, didn't catch any of them. And if you look at his chart, it really is back and forth. He has 1 good week, 1 bad week, 1 good week, 1 bad week. So if you're superstitious, this is going to be his good week. Do I trust it? No, I don't want anything to do with it. Bad matchup, bad everything. And we've seen week in and week out that the Bills can put up 100 points and he still won't be involved. It is a tough matchup, but you have to stick to starting your stars. Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Kincaid even can be started. As for the Cowboys, we're starting everybody. They've proven to be good and viable. They have the offensive volume, all of that kind of stuff. Start them. But I know a lot of people are on the fence about DeAndre Swift. He hasn't scored double-digit points in 3 weeks, which is a little bit discouraging. And a lot of people are writing him off. But the reality of it is he's had insanely tough matchups against the Cowboys and 49ers the past 2 weeks. That's going to be tough for any running back. But he gets a breath of fresh air against the Seahawks here, who is their most positive matchup since week 8 against the Commanders. The Seahawks allow the 4th most points to opposing running backs this year, an absolute cakewalk for them, and they're projected for 25 points. They're going to be a lot of scoring opportunities, and they're favored to win this game by 7 points, which just means more rushing opportunities and a run-heavy script from the beginning. He also gets a good amount of involvement in the receiving game. We've known this all season, and in close games within a touchdown, DeAndre Swift has averaged 14 fantasy points in over 70% of the snaps, which is very, very good for running backs. It's going to be the same thing this week, and probably even better because they're going to be in control of this game for a majority of it, if not all of it. We're going to be starting all of the Eagles guys for this reason. We're going to be starting a majority of the Seahawks receivers as well, because again, the Eagles secondary is not that good. They allow a good amount of points to the wide receivers. But on the flip side of that, I'm really not loving starting Kenneth Walker. This Eagles defense is one of the toughest against running backs. They allow the 4th least points, and now we have Zach Charbonnet in the mix, a guy that takes a lot of third down and receiving role work. So Kenneth Walker is really going to rely on a touchdown this week. Is he startable? Yeah, but I do have my suspicions. I'm not in love just throwing him, setting him, and forgetting him into my lineup. But very quickly here in one breath, let's sit Devin Singletary, especially if CJ Stroud is missing this week. I want nothing to do with this offense if that's the case. Is he leading this backfield? Yes, but it's still a 60-40 split. He really doesn't get that much valuable usage. And if you've been around this page for long enough, you know we absolutely hate committee running backs. And it's not like they get an insanely tough matchup this week against the Titans, but they are a lot better in run defense at home, which they are this week. So it is a little bit more negative. I have him projected for about 7 fantasy points this week. He doesn't get enough consistent involvement in the pass game for him to be safe either. And if you have no CJ Stroud and a terrible offense led by Davis Mills, get him out of your starting lineup. I'm really not loving anybody here. As for the Titans, we're starting Derrick Henry. He has a history of destroying the Texans. That should continue again, especially if there's no CJ Stroud, because their offense is going to be terrible, which is going to lead to a more run-heavy script for Derrick Henry. DeAndre Hopkins is also a decent start as well, but he is a bit more risky on a week-to-week basis. But for the fun part of this video, if you guys have been watching the videos this week, you know exactly where I'm going with this. A quarterback that we do need to start is Matthew Stafford. His roster percentage jumped from 30 to 70% 50% through the waiver period, but I hope you got him while you still can. Make sure to double check just in case he is still available though. But this team has been on fire. He's had 20 fantasy points in his last 3 games, and this team has put up 30 points in their last 2 games against very tough defenses. But now they get a dream matchup against the Washington Commanders. Again, this is terrible to say because this is my team, but you gotta be honest, they allow the most points to opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers by a long shot this year, and this is a great spot to be starting Matthew Stafford. They're top 5 in pretty much every point allowed to every position this year. Their pressure rate is also one of the worst in the NFL, which is great for Matthew Stafford because he's gonna have time for his routes to complete. He's gonna go through all his progressions, not really have to break a sweat the entirety of the game. And when you have a guy like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua on the other side of the ball, you're gonna be absolutely fine. And he's been averaging 35 pass attempts since their bye week. The volume is there for his fantasy points to be great. And one thing that makes this matchup even better and more safe is that this matchup is projected for 50 total points. There's gonna be a lot of scoring, a lot of yardage, a lot of everything. Great for Matthew Stafford. With that being said, we're starting everybody on the Rams. We're starting almost everybody on the Commanders as well because this point total is so high. Sam Howell, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel in that order. We can start Brian Robinson, but I'm not too in love with it. But real quick, some defenses we can plug and play this week that we can grab off the waiver wire. The Falcons are number 1. We've consistently targeted the teams that play the Panthers and the Jets because their offense is just so terrible, and it grades out great for us, and it's continued to grade out as one of the best defenses, I guess you could call defenses, in the league. And the Falcons get that matchup this week against the Panthers. They have a terrible offense. Is that because of Bryce Young or their offensive line? I don't know. I don't care. All I know is that it means fantasy points. You can and should also go after the Bears, who are one of the best sleeper defenses of the year right now. They're ranked the defense 6th since week 10, and they're also number 1 in takeaways since week 11. That both includes their bye week that they had in week 13. They are just that much ahead of everybody else. A lot of this has to do with the addition of Montez Sweat to the defense. Either way, it's a great one we can go ahead and pick up that isn't rostered in a lot of leagues, but nobody ever gives kicker advice on here, so I'm going to be the guy to do that for you. The number 1 kicker we can go ahead and pick up off waivers that's only rostered in 2% of leagues, but can quite literally give you the points to get you that win and put you over that hump, is Lucas Havirsik. And I hope I'm saying that right because I don't know. But when I said the Commanders are positive towards everybody, I meant quite literally everybody. They are number 1 in points allowed to the kicker position. This team has been on fire, scoring so many points, and the kicker flow follows the quarterback. This matchup is projected for 50 total points. More points equals more kicking opportunities. He's had double-digit points in the last 2 games. When the Rams are scoring a lot of points, they're projected to score a lot this week, and they're also projected to win by a touchdown. This is just a spot where you can't ignore the matchup, but I'm going to give you a sit for the kicker position as well because I can't just give you a start and not a sit. If you got Tyler Bass, consider sitting him. This matchup is terrible. Kickers follow the trends of offenses, and they get a matchup against the Cowboys, which is an absolutely tough one. They allow the 2nd least points to opposing kickers, and they're also tough against teams, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, all of that. He has a lot of name value, but he's not necessarily the best guy to put in our lineups. But that is going to finish this video. If you guys did enjoy, I seriously appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next videos after this week's games.